church was built in 1743, and it's a New Year's greeting made in 1765, and I think 1786. But in 1815, this is what he was up to. There's long been this question of, did Fraktur artists ever paint furniture? Where do you keep your scrap paper in the outhouse? I had to publish it whereabouts unknown because I didn't know where the piece was. I wasn't even sure what this was. I thought it was maybe a window curtain and thought, well, wait a minute. I know that piece is at Winterthur. What is going on? What's hanging on the wall here? So it's a really special object. There's only 2 pieces I know of like this. One of the Fraktur that everybody talks about, totally singular. It's the only Fraktur that I know of made for a native of Delaware. There's always some kind of replica or knockoff of this piece. People love it. There are 12 private collectors and institutions who loaned objects to this show. This piece was found in the Bible owned by a Mennonite family. Looked up who this pastor was, and sure enough, he was a German Catholic. This was owned by Anna Schantz, and the Schantz family helped to found Johnstown. A man named Heinrich Otto, who's sort of the granddaddy of Fraktur artists, having that family history that sometimes really makes the difference. Well, what does it mean to be Pennsylvania German? What does it mean to be an American? And it really has been more than 30 years since there was a major comprehensive exhibit on Pennsylvania German folk art. Let me introduce you to the collectors. Henry Francis DuPont, he's really sort of a pioneering collector. He's collecting not only, high-end things like Philadelphia Rococo high chest, but also the folk art. But then sort of the next generation, Pastor Frederick Asser Weiser, who had this really unique opportunity where he's interacting with the culture. He was even doing oral history interviews among the Amish in Mifflin County, Pennsylvania, and literally buying family heirlooms off the walls. So those are the collectors. This portrait is a new discovery, painted by a German immigrant artist, John Lewis Krimmel, considered one of America's first genre painters. And this portrait is another loan to the exhibit of a beautiful young German girl from Philadelphia. And then this section on looking closely, where we delve into tools, techniques, how are pieces made, how do we authenticate them. One of my favorite stories are these 4 birth and baptismal certificates that are lined up, made for siblings, 3 sisters and their brother, all printed at the Ephrata Cloister in Lancaster County, and then hand decorated with the color and sort of filled in the blanks with the genealogy. But one of the really neat things about these is we can tell they were made sort of at the same moment. Not only do they look nearly identical, but there's actually paint transfer from front to back, where the artist painted a piece, set it aside, painted the next one, and just literally stacked it right on top of the piece he had just finished painting when it was still wet. And then many of them have other handwriting adding the date the person died and how many children they had, because these things sort of evolved with you. These were very personal documents, very private things that you kept rolled up or folded in a drawer in a book, fortunately, because that's helped preserve them, of course. If everyone had hung them and let sunlight hit them and everything over the years, they wouldn't be in the kind of condition that they are today. We've done a lot of analytical testing on these and other Fraktur, and so there's some samples of the different very brilliant pigments and what they looked like originally in the case. And then over here, we look at questions of authenticity, tools, techniques, how are pieces made, how do we authenticate them, how do we tell the difference between pieces. And so this is a authentic Fraktur that Winterthur acquired a few years ago, made both lettering and decoration by an immigrant named Konrad Trevitz. The piece to the right of it is after Konrad Trevitz, probably circa like 1980 or 1975. Like the copper oxide green will often over time turn a brown color, but on the forgery, there is no copper oxide. They just went right for a brown pigment to kind of forge that aged copper look. But then in the case, we have a sort of different comparison where we have the original needlework dated 1833 from Pastor Weiser's collection. I knew that piece was safely in storage at Winterthur when I walked into an antique show, and across the room on the wall, I saw this piece and sort of did a double take and thought, well, wait a minute, I know that piece is at Winterthur. What is going on? What's hanging on the wall here? And I walked up to it, and here it was an early revival piece made in 1944, long before this piece had ever been published or exhibited. And so perhaps when it was still in the family, did somebody, want to make their own version? I don't think made with any intent to fool or deceive anybody, but to make a needlework record of the original that somebody wanted. In terms of educational Fraktur, these pieces tend to be coming out of the Mennonites and the Schwenkfelders who don't practice infant baptism, so they're typically not making those baptismal certificates, but they're big believers in education. And so we see a couple types of Fraktur that they're making. A lot of these small little drawings of birds or tulips, which are like rewards of merit. This piece is addressed to a little boy named Jacob, and it says, "You learned your ABCs with diligence." And so very young children would be given pieces like this. When you were learning to write then, the school teacher would present you with a Vorschrift or a writing sample. Students would practice copying these documents, and so you get these sort of regional schools of Fraktur that begin flourishing after 2 or 3 generations within a particular community. Why is this piece so big? Basically all it shows us is 4 different alphabet systems, and maybe a schoolmaster perhaps might have made this piece that he could display in the classroom. It's just speculation, but it does kind of bring that to mind. A lot of the artists making these pieces are immigrants. You definitely see this kind of decoration going on in Germany, in German-speaking areas of Europe. The nuances evolve in Pennsylvania. So like here, these 3 great pieces of pewter, William Will is pewter in Philadelphia. He made this chalice and the flagon. And then another German immigrant, a Moravian, made this extraordinary pewter altar stick, one of 4 for an early Catholic church in Bally, Pennsylvania. The documents tend to really differ between Europe and Pennsylvania, where these are 2 European pieces, and so they have flowers, they have tulips, they have hearts on them, but there's actually precious little genealogy information. You don't even have the child's name of birth. One of or maybe both of the pieces, it only gives the child's first name. It's not a sort of genealogy document, it's basically a baptismal wish. Versus in Pennsylvania, there's this sort of obsession with the genealogical data. And so on a typical certificate, just to take this one, you get the father's name, Heinrich Grimm, his wife Katharina, her maiden name was Schneider, have little Abraham in 1802, it even gives his sign of the zodiac. The pastor who baptized him, his date of baptism, who the godparents were, the county, and the township that he was born in. This one is very typical, all the genealogy in the big heart. The smaller hearts are quotes from a Lutheran baptismal hymn that tells us, "I am baptized if I die immediately. What harm to me is the cool grave." And then you see pieces like this with the healthy young man, then he's on his deathbed, he's in his coffin, and only when he gets to heaven is it in full color. This is the first Catholic church west of the Susquehanna, the Conewago Chapel in York, Pennsylvania. This is the second church on this site, and then the rectory, and the artist even drew this amazing little weather vane. He put the date that he made the Fraktur in the little date stone of the church. But then when I was working on the labels for the exhibition, I realized that this girl, Barbara Reuter, was baptized in that church. So I thought that was a neat connection. I realized that the pastor who baptized her, they had CATH, which I thought, is that Catholic? Is that what the artist is saying? And so I looked up who this pastor was, and sure enough, he was a German Catholic who immigrated to serve as priest for that congregation. The Pennsylvania German Stube, or stove room, was the main living room within the household. And the center of that was usually a cast iron stove. And if you look, there's no opening to this stove. It's just basically a radiator that emits wonderful heat without the smoke and draft of a fireplace. There's a hole in the back side of the stove, an opening that through the kitchen fireplace in an adjacent room, you would feed the stove and stoke its fire. All 5 plates are original, they go together, and normally these stoves, the plates have all been separated because they, of course, come apart. And so to have an actually intact stove altogether is quite rare. The door with the towel hanging on it is another Pennsylvania German tradition. This door has the original wrought iron hooks that were there for holding one of these decorated as show towels. People didn't actually use them but young women would stitch these to sort of show off their needlework skills, and they would be hung on the door just for nice or just for show. The same skills could be used for decorating a tablecloth, which is much less common to find. And this one even has the name of the young woman who stitched it embroidered on the end that's facing us, so that as you walked into the room, you could see her name, Ava or Ava Kiss. So everything from, Bible readings in their family, eating meals, spinning, all kinds of household work would have taken place in that room. The 6 cooking utensils are an original set, probably a wedding present for a young woman. It had been purchased by Henry Francis DuPont, all 6, and then somehow 2 of the pieces got away. We were able to acquire them and reunite the set, and it's a very complete set to have the 6 utensils. Normally it might only be 3 or 4 pieces, so this is sort of the full deal. And then the cloth hanging behind it is another very rare object made by Sarah Yoder, 1867, a kind of unique tradition of a utensil cloth. Because of course you don't want your wall to get dirty, your white plastered wall, while you're cooking. And so they actually would make these decorative little cloths to hang on the wall to keep it clean, and you could just wash the cloth there. 4 more wonderful decorated hand towels with this great phrase here in German, "This is the way I pass my time." It's this idea of, as this girl was laboriously stitching this entire piece and making the drawn work, no doubt the time that went into it was certainly on her mind. A rare piece that is much less known is a privy bag. Where do you keep your scrap paper in the outhouse? Well, why not have a decorated bag to store it in, of course? And so this bag has a slit down the side, a sort of 7-inch slit that you'd easily be able to put your scrap paper in there and reach in and get it. But then it has the telltale little cloth loops at the top corners that you could use to hang it inside the privy. And this one supposedly came out of a privy in Hanover, Pennsylvania. Quilting was another, of course, big tradition, and so we have quilted pillowcases here, the quilt on the wall. Sometimes they'll have this common phrase, which was, "O noble heart, bethink your end." And they'll have it, it was so common on Mennonite art that they don't even usually bother to spell it out, they just put an acronym. Different examples of women's clothing here, and then underneath the clothing with a shift, that was your sort of basic undergarment for a woman in the 18th century. So this is a common piece, but a rare survival. Starting to look at sort of more patriotic motifs, the American eagles. I love the artist has substituted, instead of the olive branch, he's holding a cluster of tulips in his talon, so this little German twist to the American eagles. And then this piece here is a pretty unique example of a political Fraktur. In sort of faded German text at the top, it says the governor's election of S. Schneider. And in 1808, Simon Schneider of Pennsylvania German heritage, he waged a successful campaign to be the next governor of Pennsylvania. And he's the first person of German heritage to be governor, and one of many to follow. But the Pennsylvania German community was so excited that one of their own had finally been elected governor. And so this was created as sort of propaganda, celebrating that, with Schneider as the big eagle and sort of his almost looking like henchmen, but his big supporters, and then all of the constituents sort of flocking to him, the big eagle in the center. There's only 2 pieces I know of like this. The other one is on view right now at the Philadelphia Museum of Art in their Fraktur exhibition. And that one, in the German, it says the royal election of the bird. It's really the Winterthur one that puts it all together with the governor's race of S. Schneider, or we wouldn't really know what they were referring to. The carved eagle hovering there on the plinth, made by a celebrated German immigrant wood carver named Wilhelm Schimmel, who comes over in the 1860s and is working in the Cumberland Valley of Pennsylvania. And he's known for making these eagle wood carvings, and then hovering over the great painted chest with an American eagle as well on the front. And then the clock case here is sort of a riot of inlaid motifs made in 1815, right at the end of the War of 1812. And the original owner of this, Benjamin Hammer, is known to have fought in the war. So this may be celebrating the American victory. But inlaid on the door are motifs taken from the Pennsylvania coat of arms, or the state seal, with the rampant horses flanking the eagle, and then below that a plow and 3 sheaves of wheat. The maker of the clock inlaid at the bottom of the hood or the bonnet door. It says in German, made by Johannes Paul. Paul was not only a woodworker, he was also a calligrapher and a surveyor. And the horseshoe curve of the Pennsylvania Railroad, he did the surveying work for that. A fabulous pair of Pennsylvania German pistols made by a gunsmith named Jacob Kuntz, who moves from the Lehigh Valley to Philadelphia and becomes a really famous gunsmith. But then here, the idea of sort of Pennsylvania Germans in the new nation and becoming full American citizens and really participating in the country and participating in commemorative activities. So these two plates from Lancaster County, believe it or not, this sort of cookie cutter looking bell, it's supposed to be the Liberty Bell, and it says in German. And here we also see the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect starting to emerge because they've spelled the word bell glug, G-L-U-G. The proper German word is Glock, with a CK at the end and an O instead of a U. But here you kind of get the dialect that's emerging. And these dates sort of 1830, 1850, so people have been here for many generations. The other plate is supposed to be Independence Hall and commemorating the centennial of its construction.